as the editor-in-chief of Typographics T, well, first a little bit of a backstory about Typographics T. So, Typographics T is the journal of the Typographics Japan Typography Association. So it's produced 3 times a year, and the magazine is produced for members. So members of the Japan Typography Association are an interesting mix of graphic designers, web designers, letterers, font designers, people who actually work with typography. And typography being, well, let's just call it type design, so word or letter design for the moment. It's a little bit deeper than that, but we'll call it that for the moment. And we also, in our association, we have some corporate members. So, for example, Takeo Paper or Morisawa Fonts. So we do have lots of companies in the association as well. So this magazine is produced for them. And our members are generally interested in typography, not in terms of type design, for example, the shape of letters or the shape of fonts or visuals or graphics. They're more interested in what typography is as a subject. So our magazine tries to reflect that a lot. So as the editor-in-chief of Typographics T, when I started, it was issue 300. So it's an interesting turning point for the association. As an association, we're 60 years old, and the magazine has been around for 40 years. That's why we're at issue 300 already. So when I took over as editor-in-chief, as editor-in-chief, I can do whatever I want with the content of the magazine. So on the first page here, I decided to, I wrote a letter to all the association members, and I told them what I'm going to be doing with the magazine. And it may be a little bit hard to see the graph here, but the central circle is, it says members. So I'm trying to make a member-focused magazine. So what that means is the content is not all about members. It's not all about member works or things that members are doing. The content is tailored for members specifically. So it's not for general designers out in the public. It's for typographers, like typography nerds, people who are crazy about typography. The second circle on the outside it says Japan. So I wanted to focus a lot on the content that is around us, or how it relates to members in a Japanese setting. And the third circle on the outside is Asia. Lots of designers overlook the fact that Japan is in Asia. Like, for example, lots of Japanese designers, turn towards Europe. There's a very Western-centric approach to design, and I think that's a little bit wrong, especially being an Australia living in Japan. Japan has its own very, very strong Japanese design culture, and I think that should be put in a stronger context of the world. So in the same way, it's strange that Japanese people look to Europe for design standards or design influences. Why don't they look to Korea or China or Hong Kong or other neighboring Asian countries? I wanted to bring the focus back to Asia. And then right at the bottom is the rest of the world. So as you can see, the rest, how do you say, we are, well, when I say we, I'm an Australian living in Japan, but I'm in Japan. So, and I'm a member of the Japan Typography Association. Members, Japan, Asia, and then the world, in that order. That's the typographic stance that I chose for a magazine. That's what I think is important. We decided, they're decided in different ways. So we're looking at typography in a greater scale. Some are decided because of, what's the best way to say this? We try to make sure that the themes are a good balance of topical and timeless. So when I say topical, I mean something that's happening right now that's important. For example, Shinohara Eita-san, he was a designer for television titles. Lots of people know in Japan, the general population knows his work. So if you say the title of a certain old TV show everybody's watched. Everybody knows the title, so everybody in a way knows him as a designer. He passed away last year, and so the fact that he passed away was big because he was a member of our association. So we decided, in a topical way, because he passed away, to reflect on his life as a designer. And this feature is about it's an interesting feature. We decided not to introduce his work, but I interviewed his wife about what kind of person he was, and she gave us some really nice stories. So that's an example of a topical text. Another example of a topical text is with the war in Ukraine. When the war in Ukraine happened, I noticed that one of my friends, who is also he's not a member of the association, but he helped with the association with translation in the past, and I noticed he was in Ukraine doing photojournalism. So I asked him if he could take some photos about the kind of typography you meet in a war zone. This is him, Kaoru-san. And he gave us a really nice photo documentary cover of like live about the type of words one meets in a war zone in Ukraine. So that was another example of a topical situation. And then we try to find a balance with like ideas that are timeless. For example, issue 301 is about Beatrice Ward's Crystal Goblet, which is a very stock standard essay on typography. It's actually 100 years old, the essay itself. If Beatrice was still alive, I think she would be 100, around that age. So Beatrice Ward's essay, even though it's very standard learning material, I learned it when I was in university. My American design friends learned about it when they were in university. In Japan, nobody knows about Beatrice Ward and the Crystal Goblet and what she was trying to say. So we translated her essay into Japanese and published a bit of a history about her. So this kind of timeless study that doesn't exist in Japan, we decided to bring it to Japan. So in that way, it's not like we're taking the world first. This knowledge doesn't exist in Japan, so let's bring it to Japan. So it's actually a Japan-focused issue, this one, even though it's about a Beatrice Ward who was an American. Another example of a timeless example is wabun. So wabun literally means Japanese fonts, Japanese type. And what it specifically refers to is, in the world of typography, wabun is Japanese typesetting. I guess you could call it typesetting or Japanese text. So it doesn't really mean typography, it just means like Japanese words, Japanese letters. Right? So if you ask a Japanese person about wabun, they talk about it all the time, right? Japanese designers will talk about Japanese typography, Japanese typesetting. But there are many, as a foreigner living in Japan, I've noticed there are many different things between obun, which is Western text, or wabun, which is Japanese text. There's lots of different things, lots of different typesetting things, and I've spoken to my foreign friends who live in Japan and work as designers, and we've noticed the differences and the differences that are interesting. So I decided to interview my foreign friends about Japanese typography, and that's why the designer designed the cover like a manga, because lots of foreigners are really interested in manga, so he wanted to make it a really poppy culture. And as you can see, the foreigners are looking into wabun. So from outside they're looking in. So yeah, it's called soto kara mite wabun, which means looking at wabun from the outside. So in this issue, friends from different places, Australia, the States, France, they all just wrote about their impressions of Japanese typography. So Japanese typography is timeless, but the spin, asking foreign designers what they think about Japanese typography, this is also, it blurs the boundaries between international and Japan, but it's a very Japan-focused issue. And it was interesting for my Japanese friends to read this and say, I didn't know that. That's an example of a timeless issue. Other issues, we just try to focus, not, as I said before, not on word form, but on what typography actually is as a genre, and expanding the boundaries of it. So it's not just about type. This is about cinema font. This is about Typojanchi, which is a Korean, it's like an art exhibition based around the theme of typography. AI. Is AI coming to take our jobs? Another famous designer in Japan, Kuro Tsuyokatsu-san, he was a good friend of mine. He passed away, and he was an editorial designer. So it's all about how he was as a member and what kind of work he did, what people thought of him. So there's lots of different themes. The latest issue is about Ishige Sensei. He's actually a Shodo master, and we asked him the similarities and differences between Shodo and typography. So yeah, they're very topical and like very broad ranging, but all based around a very core theme of typography. A long time ago, when our association was founded, it was actually called the Japan Lettering Association. So lettering is literally people who would draw letters, like signboards, or a long time ago, before data came along and technology and computers, fonts were actually hand painted, and they were photographed and then scaled down, and they were used in phototype setting. So letterers, people used to paint, actually draw, which is why it was called the Lettering Association. And then there was a big, in Japan, there was a big design conference back in 1964. It was about the time of Banpaku. Lots of foreigners came to Japan, and they held lots of discussions between foreigners and Japanese designers about lettering and forms of typography. And that was the first time the word typography came to Japan. So it was soon after that our association changed its name from the Japan Lettering Association to the Japan Typography Association, because they were fixed not on lettering but on typography. How do you say, development of visual languages, which include not just letters but things like pictograms or logos. This is also like a visual language. So there's one other big influence, and that's about the word typography itself. So a long time ago, like in the 60s and 70s, the general populace, or the general person, had no idea what the word typography meant. If you said to someone, oh, I study typography, or I'm a typographer, or I work with font design, the general person would look at you and say, what? what are you talking about? But that's changed now. We're, in the information age, and everybody's quite aware of what fonts are, or if you say the word typeface, people understand what it means. So if I say I'm a typographer to somebody who doesn't know anything about design, they would say, oh, do you do word design, logo designs? So people have a general understanding about what typography is. So this also has influenced how we perceive typography. But bringing that back, with the general understanding of typography having grown, and our association shift away from the focus of form towards the focus of what's going on behind the letters. So for example, with cinema font, utsuru moji, there's an interesting story behind this article, but an Australian designer living in Tokyo called Dan contacted me, and he said, hey Duncan, I want to interview the designer of cinema font. Do you know him? He contacted me through the association, and I said, no, I don't know the designer of cinema font, but I think maybe we can find out. So I asked my association members, and they introduced me to Sato-san, and we both sat on a Zoom call and we interviewed the Satos. So this, it's how to say, cinema font is a very special font. It's the font you see that's used in Japanese cinemas and for subtitles. So with Japanese people, lots of the foreign films that come into Japan, some people don't like the dubbed versions. They prefer the actual original. They want to listen to the original English, and they want to read the Japanese subtitles. So a very special type of font. When I say special, it was built to be very easy to read, but it has such a unique appearance. People just know what it looks like. So when people see the font, they know what it is, but they don't know the name of it. And it's actually called cinema font, but nobody knows it's called cinema font. And it's actually only used in movies. and games and on screens, and you'll never see it published in a magazine. So Dan was very interested with this issue, not with the design of the font, not with it. He was interested in why people understand this as cinema font and how it came to have this shape. So we're looking at not the surface level of the typography, but what's going on behind the scenes. So not the surface level, the project level, the kikaku, like the planning, what's going on behind the scenes. And I've seen a massive shift in focus from visual typography to project typography, like what's happening behind the scenes. How typography is perceived is different to the country. And you can actually see it not just in the country, but in culture as well, of the culture of the people of the country. I don't want to say anything rude here, but I feel Japanese people are very different to Chinese people, very different to Korean people, very different to people from Hong Kong. And how do you say, the way, the differences in the people also influences the way that they look at typography. For example, Korea has an example, Typojanchi. And Typojanchi, the exhibition, is about exploring what is possible with communication. So it's, with the cover of Sato Koji-san, designer, he's actually the head designer for our magazine. He designed the cover for this, which is about Typojanchi. I went with him to Korea in 2023 to learn about, to see the exhibition and interview the organizers. And he designed the cover because the T is blurring, much like Typojanchi is blurring the lines of what typography means. So I find that the view of typography in Korea is very liberal. It's becoming more liberal. If you go to Typojanchi, you come home and you think, wow, anything can be typography. As long as if it's a type of language, anything can be typography. And I admire that. I think it's really challenging. It's expanding the definition, expanding the possibilities of what typography can be. And that's a trend I see in Korea. A difference, for example, with Taiwan and comparing Korea and Taiwan. Taiwan is very similar to Japan, as in they both have a very strong kanji culture. So kanji is the Chinese characters. So Taiwan retains the original form of the Chinese characters. In mainland China, they have a simplified version of it, which is called simplified Chinese. In Taiwan, they use the very traditional, very difficult versions of the Chinese characters. But that's that's different to Korea, which has given up kanji, given up Chinese characters altogether in the place of Hangul, which has also developed its own way. Korea liberated itself from its original language, and typography feels liberated in that way too. In Taiwan, there's a lot of respect for tradition, which is very similar to Japan. So in terms of typography, designers from Japan and designers from Taiwan, when they look at each other's designs, they can read difficult kanji, then they enjoy reading difficult kanji. And so that's something that's very similar, also a little bit different to other countries. I think they both love kanji, Japan and Taiwan as well. And talking about Japan as well, Japan is very stoic. It's very slow moving. Japanese people are very slow to change. And that's, that can be good. I don't want to say bad. It can be difficult to propose things that might be new in Japan. Yeah, I know, I've been in Japan 20 years, I know that Japanese people are they'll do something only when someone else has done it first. So to be the first person to do something in Japan is quite difficult. But if you can successfully do it, and you get a lot of attention for it, everybody else starts copying you. So you see this with trends, or you see this with not just typography, but lots of subculture as well. So in Japan, the designers, especially the elder generation, tend to be very stubborn. They stick to the old ways of doing things. And this idea of sticking to the old ways, and the old ways are good, is something that stays around a lot in Japan. It's very rare you'll see something trendy in Japan. There is a lot of what's happening at the moment, but the trends that happen in Japan tend to involve things that are old. Japan at the moment is constantly going through a retro boom. And when I say retro boom, I mean there's lots of popular modern designs that look like they were made 30 years ago, 40 years ago, you know. They're built to look old. So that's an example of them being stoic, but being trendy about it at the moment. So Japan is different in those ways. So yeah, it depends on what Asian country you look at. You see different forms of typography throughout each one. I think that the definition of typography is it's slowly growing, but typography can be broad, but it's actually not that broad. I think Korea is trying to broaden the scope of typography. I think in a way Japan is really not. Our association, if you look at, this is the Japan Typography Association's annual, and what this is a 300-page book which is the result of a competition we hold every year to award, they call it Japan's best typography, but we have lots of entries from China or Hong Kong or Taiwan, overseas, international, neighboring Asian countries as well, and occasionally some from Europe. If you look at this book and the way it's categorized, so all of the entries are divided into categories. And if you look at the categories, you can see how our association is judging typography, or what we think of as typography at the moment. So for example, from the top, we have visual identity, logo type and symbol marks, graphics, packaging, book and editorial design, display and environment, type design, infographics, on-screen, experimental, student, and grand prize. So these are different categories that are in the magazine, as you can in the book, and as you can see, they're very form-based categories. So books, logos, and so that's how we look at typography. But with the magazine, this is more like a journal. It's more experimental. So we try to look at typography at across a much broader spectrum. So we're not just looking at logos, or we're not just looking at pictograms, or we're not just looking at font design. We're trying to find out what's going on behind the scenes. Yeah. So a couple of examples would be Beatrice Ward's Crystal Goblet. So the Crystal Goblet essay is not about. Some people think it's about typesetting or about beautiful letters. It's not about beautiful letters. It was written for typesetters, people who are typesetting, but it's not about beautiful letters. It's about legibility and, the foundational principle of readable text. And what Beatrice Ward says, I imagine many people know, is that the content of the text is like wine, and your typography should be like a glass. So it should be beautifully clear. So when you drink wine, you don't focus on the glass, right? You focus on the wine. So the glass should be as transparent as possible, as beautiful as possible. So her metaphor, the glass and the wine, is a perfect example of how typography should be. But in the essay, she doesn't tell you how to typeset. She doesn't tell you how to make it look beautiful. It's just a guiding principle. So in this way, we're not focusing on form, we're focusing on the story behind the form. Another example would be Jibun font. So this is issue 309. We made this issue a bit like a manga series. So we have a running feature in Typographics T called Adventure Type. So in Adventure Type, there's me, and then there's my friend Yohei-san, and then there's our other friend Kanda-san, and we're on an adventure to make a Japanese font, and it's kind of a crazy adventure, so we decided to put it all in manga format. And in this issue, we interviewed three designers who are part of the Jibun font team. So what Jibun font means is my font, my own font. And they have a they have a system. They built a very interesting digital system, and with the digital system you can actually change the look of your font to make it easier to read specifically for yourself. So they built it for people who have difficulty reading, people with dyslexia. So dyslexia is a form of it's a form of an hindrance that young children have that stops them from reading characters. They don't like the look of characters, and reading long text makes them tired or agitated. So Jipun Font, the team came up with the idea of if they could change the way that the characters looked to make them more softer or more gentle on the eyes or heavier at the bottom, so that you know which way you're looking at the text. It would make it easier for people with or children, especially young learners with this disability to read. So they're not font designers. Actually, one of them is a font designer, but this project is not about font design. It's about taking fonts we have and adjusting them to make them more visually legible. It's about legibility. So in this way, we're not looking at the form of the font, we're looking at the story behind the font. That's another example of how we are trying to, yes, we look at pictograms, yes, we look at logos, yes, we look at typography, but we're not just looking at it on a surface level, we're looking at it on a much deeper educational level. There's a cartoon called Adventure Time. So in Typographics T, we have a series called Adventure Type. Yeah, so in Adventure Type, there's me, my friend Kanda-san, and there's me, and then there's Ogawa Yohei-san. The three of us, we are trying to design a Japanese font. And the reason we chose to make it like a manga, or a manga form, is because, you know, Japanese fonts or font design, it can be very, very boring, right? But we don't think it's boring. We think it's actually very interesting and very exciting. So we wanted to make it like an adventure. And, you know, we wanted to get young people interested in font design, so that's why we decided to make it like a manga and call it Adventure Type. There are a lot that have left an impression on me. Some are just funny. For example, like with cinema font, you know, my friend Dan, he's an Australian designer living in Tokyo. He contacted me, an Australian designer living in Kyoto, and we wrote in Japanese about a Japanese font called cinema font. It's funny. Why is an Australian designer working with an Australian designer, two Australian designers living in Japan, why are we researching Japanese fonts? It's just funny. And then the Ima Kono Shunkan no message, which is the story about the Ukraine war and the stories that you find during the war in Ukraine. We decided this 2 weeks before printing. So this happened very, very quickly. But it happened because the war started. And I felt that we needed to do this now because we didn't know if, you know, Ukraine was going to become part of Russia at the time. So we rushed to produce this one. So that was important. Yeah. You know, Shinohara Eita-san, I met him just once. And he was towards the end of his life. He was in a wheelchair, but very nice guy. He had a big smile on his face, and he was really happy to come back to the association and see all his old friends again. And at the time, I didn't know who he was, right? When he passed away, everybody was telling me, you have to do an article about Shinohara Eita. And I said, really? Why? And then I started researching his work, and he is amazing, like an amazing person who's just done so many things that everybody knows. He is like a classic example of an invisible designer. And yeah, speaking to his wife, I also learned that he's just a nice guy. That was nice. And yeah, lastly, one for all of the Korean students out there. If you didn't go to Taipo Janshi all these years, what are you doing? Like, as a Korean living in Seoul, you must go to Taipo Janshi. I heard that it finished recently that they're not sure about when the next Typojanchi will be, which is kind of sad. But honestly, the history of this exhibition and what this exhibition is trying to do is definitely top within Asia. This level of exhibition, there's nothing like it. It's so boundary expanding and so eye-opening. And I've been in the field of typography for 20 years. I thought I knew a lot about typography. Visiting Typojanchi made me think that maybe we've just scratched the surface of what typography really could be. So yeah, I definitely recommend Typojanchi, the exhibition, and reading up on it, but also this article for Korean students, because we interviewed the Typojanchi team. It was the first all-female team, female-led all-female team for Typojanchi in the 14 years I think it had been around. So yeah, this article is definitely worth the read. Very, very simple a message for all of the students in Korea, all of the designers in Korea. It's funny how, when we want to study design, not just people in Korea, but people in Japan as well. When we want to study design, we jump on a plane and we go to Europe, right? You jump on a plane, you go to America. Like, it's kind of strange in a way. There's so much to learn here in Asia, just in our neighboring countries. There's so many good designers, so many new styles of design thought, so many really unique approaches to typography just here in Asia, in our own backyard. It's really strange that even now, there's not much of a strong connection between Japan and Korea. I mean, Seoul is 2 hours on a plane. I can go to Seoul and come back to Osaka on the same day, and I can have lunch, meet people, chat to people, and come back to Japan on the same day. Why is there not more communication between Korean designers and Japanese designers? I think that's really funny, but I think it's also a message for the future designers in Korea and future students in Korea. Maybe it's time we stop looking at the West for design. Maybe it's about time we started looking in our own Asian backyard for hints about the future of design, or about creating new design culture. That's my message to you all.